The final G7 ministerial meeting under the Biden administration kicks off today in the Italian cities, and rising global tensions from Kiev to the Middle East are looming over this summit. Over the next few days, foreign ministers from the G7 nations will convene to address pressing global issues, with the ongoing wars in Gaza, Lebanon and Ukraine topping the agenda. Additionally, the summit will address the ICC's arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Commenting on the matter, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni emphasized that the issue warrants further analysis. Can the world's leading foreign ministers coordinate to pressure Israel into facilitating a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, or will it be a business as usual? Welcome to In Depth. The highly anticipated summit in Italy will be the first since Donald Trump's re-election to the White House and the last under an Italian presidency. The Italian towns of Fiuggi and Angiani are set to become a theatre of international diplomacy for 2 days as they host a G7 meeting of foreign ministers. It is the second G7 foreign ministers meeting to be hosted in Italy in 2024 and the first one after Donald Trump's re-election to the White House. As global crises intensify, foreign ministers of the G7 will gather in Italy this week to address urgent global issues like the Israeli wars in the Middle East and the conflict in Ukraine.
On Monday and Tuesday, foreign ministers from the G7 nations will meet in Italy for a 2-day ministerial gathering. The first day will include key Middle Eastern stakeholders, with ministers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the Secretary General of the Arab League joining the discussions. This G7 meeting comes at a critical moment as the wars in Ukraine, occupied Palestine, and Lebanon enter decisive phases. The G7 will focus on brokering a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon while navigating the ongoing humanitarian crises. According to Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, one of the key topics of discussion will be the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meloni has stated that the issue requires further analysis. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andris Bega will be in attendance as the G7 looks to address the escalating situation in Ukraine, especially after Russia's recent hypersonic missile strike. This will be the final G7 foreign ministers meeting before United States President-elect Donald Trump takes office, which has heightened the urgency of advancing diplomatic efforts ahead of potential shifts in the United States foreign policy.
To help us analyze this meeting, we're joined from Rome by Federico Castiglione, a researcher at the Institute of International Affairs, and joining us from Tokyo is Satoru Nagao, a senior researcher at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Thank you both for joining us here on In Depth. Let me start off with Mr. Castiglione. The G7 summit will address the ongoing wars, Israeli wars on Gaza and Lebanon. Given the escalating violence, what role do you think that the international community, especially the G7, can play in achieving some sort of ceasefire, which is currently being negotiated through American mediation, specifically in Lebanon? Mr. Castiglione?
I'm talking.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Did you hear the question, or do you want me to repeat it for you?
Yes, I do. I did.
Okay.
Hear. Yeah, I was saying that the G7 is an important forum for most of the international stakeholders, and therefore we should look closely at the G7 and what the G7 will deliberate. However, before Trump's takeover, we shouldn't expect much from the G7 nor any other international organization. The first day, as you told us, will be devoted to the Middle East, and especially the focus would be on the Netanyahu's arrest warrant that Mr. Trump, is strongly against of, and this is quite relevant. And the President Biden, the incumbent president of the United States, has already called outrageous. So actually, the attitude of the United States, of both the president and the future president, is quite positive towards this arrest warrant. The Europeans are divided. There are countries such as France, which have somehow pledged to respect this arrest warrant, and others such as Italy and Germany, which are more reluctant.
Yes, but I mean, other than the ICC rulings itself, can we sort of discuss, maybe, is the G7 going to actually discuss the possibility of pressuring the Israelis, for instance, to take a ceasefire deal, or the sides in the Middle East in general to take a ceasefire deal? Is this up for discussion during the G7?
As I already said, it's really hard because actually Netanyahu has promised a ceasefire, and everybody is expecting it at this point. But the international community will not probably pressure Netanyahu much before Trump's takeover, because the U.S. foreign policy is really relevant in this game.
Okay. Mr. Nagao, the G7 is also set to discuss the war in Ukraine, where tensions have been escalating, especially after Russia's hypersonic ballistic missile strike and a looming threat of a nuclear escalation in general. How should the G7 countries respond to this new development in the conflict? Will there be some sort of way to, hold back and restrain rather than escalate the tensions?
This is a direct link with new administration in the United States, Trump lead, because he promised to end this conflict within 24 hours after he sworn in. So this means that the next 1 month is very vital to arrange this negotiation. That's why indeed the battle has escalating just now, because both Russian side and Ukrainian side want to get more car to negotiate.
So you talked about the idea that things may not necessarily appear to change in strategy until a new U.S. administration comes into office. But the Biden administration is sort of what helped escalate the tensions. Is that not correct? Are the G7 members not going to address, maybe the Biden administration holding off on sending, for instance, support to the Ukrainians until the new administration comes into office? Is this something that's up for discussion?
Yes, of course, Biden administration want to show their influence towards Russia, the invasion to Ukraine, because Trump administration will try to end this conflict, but at the same time, the achievement Biden stopped Russia's invasion is maybe good achievement Biden want to advertise. The problem is Biden administration policy related with their weapon provided by the United States to Ukraine, that is indeed simply said, view from a commentator like me, it was not so effective, because when Ukraine has a military power to get back their territory, Biden did not allow to use a long-range weapon or the fighter jet and something like that. But now he allowed to use it, so that's why the timing was very bad. So from this, what is the Biden strategy in Ukraine is a little bit controversial and unclear.
Okay. Mr. Castiglione, could we also get your perspective? You also talked about the idea when it comes to the Middle East, everyone's sort of wait and see until the new administration comes in. Is this also true for Europe?
Yes, this is also true for Europe. Europe actually is in a transitioning phase as well. because besides Meloni and in Italy and such as in Spain, actually every European government currently is weakened by some internal political factors. We are expecting elections, early elections in Germany, and there is quite a weak new government in France. And therefore, the most relevant actors in Europe are weakened by their domestic internal politics. That's why all the eyes are on Washington, and we are waiting for Mr. Trump to take office. The Commission, even the European Commission, who has been one of the most unifying actors in Europe, is still to take office, and there is a vote scheduled in the European Parliament the next week. Therefore, yes, this is a kind of transitioning phase for Europe. That's why the US elections have been so important, even for our continent.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Nagao. With the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Seba attending the G7, how likely is it that the ministers will offer more support for the Ukraine efforts when it comes to the military efforts there and political support? You spoke a bit about the idea of holding back. Is his presence at the G7 going to change the stance of holding back?
Yes, Ukraine needs support to maintain their territory, even if the Trump administration will arrange a negotiation between Russia and Ukraine to ceasefire. Because the view from the long-term strategy of Russia since 2014, one by one, Russia is getting the territories, even if the size is small and the cost is very high. So that's why there is a high possibility that Russia will restart the war, even if the ceasefire will come under the Trump administration. So that's why Ukraine needs military power, enough defense power, as much as possible. So that's why now is the chance the Biden administration will allot all of the resources he has and provide to the Ukraine.
Okay, Mr. Castiglione, you spoke earlier in the interview about Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni saying that they need to further analyze regarding the ICC arrest warrants, in addition to other, EU countries as well, towards, arresting Benjamin Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant if they set foot into European countries. Italy has said that some officials say in Italy that they are arresting Netanyahu if he enters the soil, and then the deputy minister says otherwise. The defense minister says a different story. What's really happening? Why is there some sort of idea that we're not quite sure where we stand when it comes to the arrest?
The reason why there is so much confusion, not only in Italy, but I would say Europe-wide, is because Israel has always been a close ally to many European governments and states, and therefore issuing such an arrest warrant against the Prime Minister of Israel is quite shocking for the Europeans, and especially Italy and Israel have been close allies for decades. Therefore, it's much controversial. Historically speaking, the right-wing governments in Italy are even closer to Israel than the far-left governments, and Meloni's government makes no exception. Therefore, there is a political proximity between the two of them, Meloni and Netanyahu, so far that even Milei from Argentina recently stated that Meloni and Netanyahu are the two possible front runners of the wars alt-right, together with Mr. Trump.
At some point, Meloni was sort of outspoken towards the Netanyahu government and the practices in the Middle East, but now she seems to be taking back her stance. Could this possibly be due to factors like, for instance, the American Senator Lindsey Graham had said that European countries who help the ICC and abide to the arrest warrants will be sanctioned? Do you think this could be a possible reason for the confusion or the lack of will to actually abide by the ICC rulings? Or is this just one senator and one idea and not necessarily how the US will handle the situation?
I believe that such a decision will be really strong from the US side. So yeah, we need to take these words carefully, very, very carefully, because the ICC is a respected international organization, and any retaliation such as that has been, prospected will be, yes, quite huge challenge to Europe. Might be a factor, but that would be from an old ally such as the United States. That would be a, an unexpected message.
Yes, so the European partners would probably take these words quite seriously, even if they're just coming from one person.
I believe that they are waiting for Mr. Trump and see what he will say in the first person as first person.
Okay. Mr. Nagao, the G7 has been quite consistent when it supports the Ukraine since the war began. What do you think the outcome of the summit will be in terms of sustaining support, especially in light of the new US administration? We also talked about this at length, but do you think that there will be continued support with the incoming administration as well, and a green light from the Trump administration if they come in, and the G7?
Yeah, indeed, I believe Trump administration will continue to support Ukraine because US cannot lose the war. So that's why even if there is a possibility the US shows their influence by reducing the support to Ukraine under the Trump administration, still there's a possibility that the US will not abandon Ukraine under the Trump administration. That's why current G7 is important indeed. The current G7 is one step towards the new administration. So before the administration sworn in, under the Biden administration, they tried to set up the big support to Ukraine. And after that, even if some reduce has happened under the Trump administration, but still the US will maintain. But that is the scenario we can expect under current G7. So that's why this G7 is something that preparation for the new administration and preparation for the ceasefire, temporary ceasefire.
So you think that there's a possibility that they're going to negotiate this diplomatically rather than continue on with military support, especially in light of the recent escalations that have hinted towards a nuclear escalation as well?
Yes, because just before the agreement, they need to try to get more strong card to negotiate. So that's why the more wider area they want to occupy, or more bigger intimidation they want to show, and these are the cards in the negotiation. So this is just before the ceasefire. They escalate the military operation that has happened, and we can see.
Okay, Mr. Castiglione, given the strong alliances that many G7 countries have with Israel, we spoke about this previously, do you think that there will be any concrete action or pressure on the Israelis over the ICC warrants, or will it just be a diplomatic discussion? I mean, they don't necessarily have to apply the warrants themselves, but maybe this could be used as a tool, for instance, to pressure the Israeli side into negotiating a ceasefire deal.
I don't think that this story will unfold as you said. Actually, I believe that everybody in Brussels and in the European capitals is expecting Mr. Netanyahu to take the lead of this peace process and agree on a ceasefire very soon. The European public is quite enraged with Israel, especially regarding the United Nations and the challenge that that Israel is posing in towards this organization. We as Italians, we have a detachment of soldiers in this UNIFIL mission of the United Nations, and Israel is targeting the United Nations mission. That's why the European public is currently so enraged with Israel. And but on the other hand, I don't expect much because, as I said, the European governments are have this kind of long tradition of contacts and friendship with Israel. That's why probably we are not going to see some real concrete steps very soon.
Okay. Okay, over to Mr. Nagao. The situation in Gaza is also one of the top of the agenda, of the G7 agenda, rather. Do you think that G7 is doing enough to hold Israel accountable for its actions, especially in light of the humanitarian crisis there? We just heard Mr. Castiglione talking about the idea that there won't be any real pressure. But right now, everything when it comes to, human rights and international law seems to be up in the air when it comes to the Israelis. Do you think there will be any form of pressure towards the Israelis?
Yeah, indeed, it is very difficult because currently the war is going, and both sides, Israeli side, the Palestinian side, do not trust each other. So even if the other country try to make pressure, the both sides do not trust each other means that it is very difficult to deal something, agree something. So that's why, of course, G7 try to make the pressure, but it will not become enough level, I believe, because the current situation is under war, and still we cannot see the end.
But when it comes to the humanitarian crisis, I mean, other than negotiating a ceasefire, the humanitarian situation right now in Gaza is quite dire. In fact, some statistics say, according to the UN, that their daily needs of medical supply, food, water, and so forth that are entering into the Gaza Strip are less than 10%, and they've been blockaded by the Israelis. Is there going to be pressure to help the humanitarian situation, at least, or at the very least, when it comes to the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, in this case, the problem is not just flow of the supply, because even if the supply enters Gaza, still someone need to escort this supply to reach destination. So that's why who will take charge? The humanitarian assistance in Gaza is a problem. United Nations do not have the military power to escort, and Israel do not have the will to do, and other country also do not want to do. So that's why someone should take charge to
But it's the
supply
Israelis that are
the
blockading
supply.
it, and they're bombing the cargoes coming in sometimes. It's mainly the Israelis who are stopping the aid from entering.
But looting is also happened inside. So both sides is a problem, the flow of the supply and how to carry safely. All of these supply lines, someone need to take charge and arrange it. But indeed, this is war zone, and it is very difficult. And many countries in the world, including both Israel side, do not want to take charge in the Gaza. So who takes charge is a matter in this case. That's a big problem indeed.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what we got there, but over to Mr. Castiglione. The EU Commission's Vice President Josep Borrell recently visited Lebanon to boost the ceasefire negotiations. With that in mind, how will the escalating Israeli attacks on Lebanon factor into the G7's approach towards the Middle East, and will the summit lead to any real movement when it comes to regional issues?
Well, of course, the European Union is relying on the actors on the ground, such as Egypt, the Arabic League, and Lebanon itself. So actually, the European strategy is to address the actors that have this kind of historical experience of the conflict in Gaza and between Israel and Palestine. The European Commission has pledged support, even in financial terms, for the Palestinians. And I would like to stress that the European nations are among the few actors worldwide that are keeping their support towards the UNRWA. And therefore, it's quite important from the European viewpoint that the actors on the ground take the lead of this ceasefire and this following peace process that we are hoping for, not only in Lebanon, but of course in Gaza. That's the other issue, as you were underlining, which is mostly concerning for the European diplomacy.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time, so thank you. That was Federico Castiglione, a researcher at the Institute of International Affairs, and Satoru Nagao, a senior researcher at Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining us here on Q News. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.